You're listening to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 126, Gimmicks and Games. In today's episode, I discuss using gimmicks and games. I discuss various gimmicks I've used in my games. I also discuss why they can work and how to use them. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribe and we'll ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode.
Bow, 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 bow. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast.
Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and I'm not joined by anyone today. I'm going to fly solo again. Just came back from another trip. It's been 2 trips, 2 weekends. Definitely really tired. Looking forward to being done with these trips coming up and just kind of being at home for a little while. Also, for some updates for the podcast, we are building up a backlog supply for future episodes. As I mentioned last week, my wife is pregnant. We're expecting a baby at the end of October, and so I want to have some backup episodes here, or at least enough episodes to kind of get me through that first 3-4 weeks of new baby. To be able to make sure that I can supply continuous episodes throughout that time as well. So I am working on that, going to do some recordings this weekend, going to do get some other people onto the pod, and we'll work that out. That's it for the updates, kind of short on that, but on to the main topic. And so today, as I was thinking about an episode to talk about, I was thinking about gimmicks and games. And again, this is kind of these sit in the category of things that you would probably do to experiment. Probably a lot of these you probably use in a homebrew game. But I thought about it under the aspect of, which ones are good and which ones are bad, and when you should do them, when you can't, when you shouldn't. And so I started to think about ones that I've done. Like true gimmicks, things that are like really geared out in a game. And so some of the things I've done is I've definitely done a game where I heavily inspired it from like Resident Evil, and it started really well because of how the setting started. It fizzled off really quick because obviously you can't box players in so bad that they need to move a school bus to get on top of the fire station. It doesn't work that way. The world of role-playing and tabletop RPGs doesn't work like the confines of a video game itself. So, trying to really mirror what a video game does is a gimmick that I've done, and I can tell you that it hasn't worked out very well. I've also done a MacGuffin a couple times. This is in my earlier GMing. I did more MacGuffins, and one of the problems with the MacGuffin is that there's only one way to solve the problem. You must get the MacGuffin. You must get the Sword of Truth. You must get the Chalice of Destiny. You must get, name your MacGuffin to thwart the evil that is in front of you. And so, as a gimmick, we've talked about it in previous episodes, which is you probably shouldn't do that. The first episode, and several times before, the MacGuffin is a great literary device. It is a terrible thing to add into a tabletop RPG. And it's fine in a video game, too. Again, because the constraints that you have there are kind of bound to the world that you have in front of you. So if you told your players ahead of time that the game is going to come down to locating this one item that will stop the evil, the game effectively ends once you get to the item. So the game is about obtaining the item. It's less about utilizing the item in its final form or whatever have you. Jared did the same thing in a game ages ago with us where he had these combined. He didn't really think out how he was going to do this, but the goal was that these things were kind of combined into some sort of like Voltron thing to help us defeat evil, and we all had a piece of the pie effectively to start the game, and we were the chosen people. We talked about that in the episode on Destiny. But the MacGuffin itself is just it great, if you're reading a book, but it's not great when you are trying to get the players to do what you want to do. Again, remember, this is not I have control in writing what the characters do. The characters move in ways and they solve problems in ways that I'm not going to be able to map out and predict. I just can't predict the human reaction to everything that I do in my story. You can get better at it. You can get better at understanding what your players might do and kind of the directions they usually take, but you will probably never be able to truly map out and get them to do exactly what you want them to do to find the MacGuffin. Also, it can make one player stand out above the others. The person who obtains the MacGuffin now is the chosen, destined one. Okay, and then what are the rest of your players at the table there for? They're there for nothing. You've effectively nullified their role in the story itself. One of the other gimmicks that I've done, a more successful gimmick, was time units. So I worked on a game. Was a one shot, and instead of trying to give them, you have like 6 hours to do something, or 24 hours to do something. I just divided it into a different time unit and said that these actions cost this much time unit. So more of like a kind of a real time strategy feel, or like a turn-based order where you're trying to utilize time effectively. It was okay. I wouldn't say it was a great gimmick that I added to a game. And it was for a one-shot, so it wasn't like my entire game hinged around this concept of time units. And that made it a lot easier to kind of be like, okay, that wasn't received great, but you know what, I got to try it out and see what the reactions were going to be to it. Another thing I did do in the previous game before that was I instituted the use of ETA points, is what they're called in the hybrid game system, or fate points, something of that, dramatic edits, things of that nature. So I did utilize that. I was very cautious about giving them to my players, meaning I gave them each one throughout the game. And the problem is that the players ended up using them great because they ended up using them to affect outcomes for NPCs, not themselves. So it was a very selfless use of the action. But also, I have very cautious players by nature. And so when I give them something of a dramatic edit, I am expecting them to hold on to it until they are facing a big bad evil, something of that nature, to then utilize it as well. So, in looking back on it, great success because they used them to affect outcomes for NPCs in a selfless manner. But it was also I was kind of clenching my fist there going, oh my God, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Because I was afraid that they were going to, hold on to them till the very end, which is the reason why I didn't give them more than one of them in the entire game. The other gimmick that I've tried to do, it's been unsuccessful because the players were more successful in the game as a whole, or my pacing was incorrect, was I was going to do a rewinding time gimmick. I didn't know how that was going to sit with the players if I did it. I've done dreams in the past, which is another thing we've talked about on this podcast, and players hate dream sequences. Okay, it is effectively nullifying all their actions. It means that there were no stakes in whatever you decide to present them. So in order to put stakes to this rewinding time, I was going to have a damage mechanic that carried them back, being that they could rewind time more, but it was going to eventually cost them their lives, was effectively the trade-off that I was going to do there. And so that was how I was going to try and solve that problem of the dream sequence and kind of working through that process. Otherwise, rewinding time is effectively just a dream sequence. So tough thing to kind of work out there. And then I've done past and present mixing, which is I did a game where the players were able to, they thought it was a dream, where they were ending up in the past, and they were seeing the past events of the town they were in. And what I was actually going to do, and I didn't flesh it out enough to kind of work out the concept, but the idea behind what I was trying to accomplish was the players could realize that their actions in the past could affect the present. So when they were in the past world, they had no control about when they were flipping between the two. But when the players were in the past, they could affect the present. And I was thinking about maybe putting some more elaborate schemes that they could do for it, but it was a shorter game. Didn't get enough time to really realize it. They did notice a couple things from it. They were able to gather some information. They were able to have conversations. But it's probably something I might play with in a future game as a whole. That one was probably the most successful of these gimmicks that I've done. Again, I don't have a basis for the rewinding time one. I might do that one again in the future, but it really depends on the speed of the players, because I didn't want to say they have to have a rewind. They were supposed to do it, if they ran out of time, they would rewind, not they have to have the rewind. So the gimmick was not integral, what you didn't need to achieve it to see it, but it was there in case I needed it. So the question is then why some of these do and don't work. Okay, and in my long history of gaming, seeing GMs do gimmicks, and then myself gimmicking out my game, this is kind of what I've come up with. A good gimmick works when they augment the gameplay just enough, just slightly, so it doesn't stray too far from the core mechanics in the game. Okay, so you don't want to have, a gimmick where they can blink phase rifles into existence in D&D. That's not going to be a good gimmick, even if the players have the greatest power imaginable. You don't want to have you just want to keep it close enough to the core mechanics of the game that they still are the gimmick doesn't overshadow what the game does. So that's the other kind of key component that I've noticed, is that they can't be core to the story's success. Meaning, if they never focus on your gimmick, they never use your gimmick, the story still goes off without a hitch. This comes down to kind of a core philosophy for this podcast and for Level Up Your Gaming, which is the story must be your driver, and it must be good. Otherwise, anything else you do to it is effectively useless. So if the players cannot have a good game, meaning I can, pick up, whether it's 1 session, 5 sessions, 100 sessions, whether I can accomplish my goals, move around, have some limitless feel to mobility, those are all things that make the game. I can solve the problem at hand, meaning you give me the problem, I try to solve it. Okay, that's the game mechanic that we've talked about in this podcast, that I've talked about in this podcast, and when I kind of continue to drive home, because these are the games that I have found most enjoyable, and these are also the games that we as a table have found the most enjoyable, and we have had the most success based upon goal-minded games, story-driven games, that's just kind of how we work in this space. And so if your story isn't good, if your game couldn't stand alone without the gimmick, then the gimmick is probably too big, too broad, too integral, that your game could easily fail because of the gimmick. So if your gimmick, like I said, if it's core to your gameplay, your story's success, then let's say your players don't like the gimmick, you can't get rid of it. You're stuck with the gimmick in the game, and now you know that your players don't like it. So the only thing that you're doing there is you're forcing your players to work through the rest of the game. And do they revolt? Are they amenable to work through the gimmick? I don't know. If it's a one-shot, probably amenable to work through the gimmick. If it's a 100-session game that has a gimmick associated with it that's core to the gameplay loop that you never discussed, that you kind of thought this would be cool to throw in, that's going to be really hard and not palatable for the players at the table. So, and you can't get rid of it, is the problem. Because it's core to your gameplay, it's core to the story. So, again, if there's a MacGuffin involved, boy, that's really, really tough to work out of your game. You could But then your story also has a major hole, which is like, well, didn't the old hero defeat this guy with the sword of truth? Like, I don't know. You can think about it. It will probably cause you a problem in your game if it's too core. A good gimmick also does not invalidate player choice. So if your players, again, this is a prime example with the Resident Evil example, okay? If I want to get on top of the fire station, I shouldn't have to move a fire truck over with a ladder attached to it. I should be able to, I could try to splunk the wall. Maybe there's a back entrance. There's all sorts of different ways that your players may try to conceptually think about, like, okay, what's this fire station look like? Okay, well, do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have a ladder? Do they have that? Whatever it may be to solve your problem, the players will start thinking about it. Because, again, your description is only so good. And so your players are going to fill in blanks, and they're going to try and solve a problem based upon the blanks. They're going to ask you, what does this thing exist? Does this thing exist? Okay? And most players will kind of work their way through that. You tell players they have to scale a mountain, and it's a sheer-faced ice cliff or whatever. The players start going, well, do we have climbing gear? Okay, well, can we go around the mountain? Can we go? They're going to look for ways away from the danger. They're going to try to find the best solution given the worst scenario that you kind of place in front of them. And mine was scaling on top of a fire station. Yours might be, something more complex and crazy. This kind of comes back to the puzzle episode that we had talked about, and the feedback that I had gotten from Gary and some others was that, the puzzle itself, why do I need to solve it? Why can't I rely upon what my character knows and the knowledge they know? Like, why add that gimmick to your game when, in fact, you could just as easily solve the problem multiple ways? It happens with social role-playing, happens in all sorts of different aspects of our game tables, and this is kind of the thing, which is the players need to have slightly more agency when they do this. This is, again, the illusion of choice here. This is actually kind of true choice the players get. The players get to kind of ask you, massage the room into existence with you by asking questions about what might or might not be there. So a bad gimmick, though, which is obviously based upon what I just said, is something that does severely limit the player action. So again, if the players can't get on top of the roof of the fire station without moving a fire truck that has a ladder that's already extended on it, okay, that's a bad gimmick, because now the players are locked into one choice. That's the answer. The answer is you must do X to achieve Y, okay? And if you don't achieve Y, you can't progress the story, okay? Now my game is now tied to this one gimmick, and the players must do it. Now one of the games that was a good success for a different group that Jared Story told for, and I kind of played in, that I hated, was this game. It was this Scion game that we ran, and Jared was doing it was Greek Scions, so all Greek mythology, and we ended up in the maze of the Minotaur. Okay, if you want to know what doesn't work in a game, a maze doesn't actually work. A dungeon crawl does, because dungeons have rooms. Okay, so every room can be a surprise to something that I need to achieve. A maze, on the other hand, a linear maze, does not work in the grand scheme of how something kind of portrays and contextually comes back to the players. Because I can solve a maze, I can look at a maze and tell you the best path to go through a maze. That's not hard at all. I cannot, on the other hand, I can't narrate you through a maze and have it be meaningful or fun. So I mean, there's only one way to solve the problem, which is get through the maze. There is no other. What I'm trying to say is there was no other friction there besides get through the maze. Okay, well, enough time and I'll get through the maze. It's not like I can physically act out going through a maze. If I physically could act out going through a maze, it would be different. But if you just show me the maze top down, I can figure it out. And so, it was not a the idea of like you move left, you move right, you're stuck, you work your way back. Like I'm not trying to do a mental maze. It's unnecessary friction, and I just have to get to the center of the maze to get there. I don't know if that quite hit my point, but aside from that felt like the right thing, which was it was too core to the gameplay, which is you must basically solve a maze, and then there you go. Now you can move on to the next piece. So again, like I said, bad gimmicks are they're core to the story, and you can't progress the story without going through the bad gimmick, which is solve a maze, solve this puzzle. You can say, find the notepad that's hidden in this room. There's all sorts of things that are like this. A lot of GMs do this. I think that it's really, really tough because it's the one thing that prevents your game from moving on. It locks up your game and blocks things up. So the question then is, what if a gimmick that I run doesn't work? And the answer for that is good or bad gimmicks should just be removed from the game if they cause displeasure around your table. So if your players are like, I don't like this at all, and they'll vocalize it, or you're going to get rolling eyes when you start doing the gimmick, yada yada yada, whatever it might be. The players, if they don't like it, they're just gonna kind of try to avoid it at all turns and whatever. And this compounds the problem, which is if the gimmick is core to your gameplay or core to your story, then your story basically is done. You can't go anywhere because the players refuse to engage with it. So, obviously, smaller gimmicks here allow you to remove them without causing ripples and problems in the game. But if you have a bad gimmick that is core to your story, you're stuck. I mean, your story literally cannot progress now without that. So, if you had in that situation, what I would do, if you think the game could be salvaged and the players enjoy everything else about the game, I'm not sure, but if that is the case, what I would recommend is you call your game night early, and then you go back home and you write your way out of that gimmick, which means you better find another solution, another answer out of the gimmick. And that might be a very kind of divine handing you information that you need. A good example of this was we played a game under our friend Ken, and he had locked himself into one way for us to solve the problem. It wasn't a gimmick, but it was just one way to solve this associated problem. So in order to solve the problem, we needed to go to this person's house alone, like at night, and basically, you're like, this is a trap. This is a real bad idea. And so we actually had worked some other things around the game. Okay, we were trying to work angles to try to lure the person out of the home, and they were all good options to get out of the home. And there was a lot of missing lore and context that he had wanted to give us, which would have been better to be able to maybe drive us to go into the home. But he forgot to give us the lore. And so he lamented this at the end of the game. We finally hit the end of it. He sort of brute forced us through it. And we did get to the end of it because it was kind of a short thing, so we kind of stomached a lot of the friction in it. But one of the things that he could have done is he could have had a reporter who has been tracking this mysterious house and these people who live there just hand us the information on the house, which would have been useful to our characters to be able to fill in blanks that we needed to give us the motivation to go into the house. Okay, because what we should have understood from things that were kind of going on is that the house was more of like a haunted house, and the person wasn't real. They didn't really exist. But we didn't have any context to that through the things that we had done within the gameplay. And so the idea was, well, knowing that information, we would be more likely to go into an abandoned house and break the law instead of a bunch of law-abiding citizens going, we're going to break into that house because we've got a hunch. Like, that was sort of the friction that we had there. And, again, that would have been it seems like hokey to just do that, or it seems like a poor choice to do that. But you have to look at your game and go, okay, if they're missing the context they need to get in there, or they're missing the motivations that I was trying to deliver through my exposition and my lore and my clues, then you can slap the players in the face with a cold, hard, this is the thing that I've been trying to tell you, but this person has more knowledge about it, and they're willing to do it, and they're doing it because, well, you guys look like stand-up gentlemen or ladies or whatever it may be that the reason why they give it to you. The reason why they give it to you is less important than the information they give you. But again, you're getting yourself out of a bad gimmick there. You're writing yourself out of the bad gimmick that you have that's locked you into this bad spot. And if you're, again, it's not going to look pretty. Like, that doesn't sound like the most pretty situation in order to fix the problem at hand, but it's better than letting your game flounder and get stuck because your players refuse to engage with the gimmick in front of them. So with all this being said, I guess the final question is, should you avoid gimmicks? And my sage advice for this would be, if you're new to tabletop RPGs, this is the first game you've ever run, you shouldn't even be dabbling in something that's very gimmicky. You should stick with the core gameplay loop and mechanics. Doesn't mean you can't write your own story, although I would probably recommend doing a module or something else, a little bit more to kind of get your feet, grounded. You understand the rules better, all that stuff that we've talked about in the past. And then, work into your own stories. Again, still sticking with the core gameplay, nothing super crazy. You're not changing anything here. Again, really, there's the game by itself. If you enjoy the tabletop role-playing, you're going to enjoy the game regardless. There's no extra seasoning needed. This is a perfectly well-done steak, not well-done steak, but, a perfectly cooked steak. That's what I meant to say. Well-done steak's terrible. And sorry, that's just my opinion. And that'll give you the confidence then in the future to be able to add a gimmick, but the gameplay itself should be enough to drive you to the table and drive you to want to continue to play the game. That doesn't mean you don't need to play at a table it's like brand new people or whatever. If you play at a table with a bunch of people and they've got some weird tricked out gimmick stuff, it's fine. But do note that if you don't like the game, or if you don't like the hobby, I would recommend going to something a little bit more vanilla if you're a player, and playing in a game that's a little bit more vanilla. The reason being is that a gimmicked game you might not like those rules. The thing that they're adding to the game may just not jive with you. It may not feel like a good experience. So for new GMs, stick to the base game. New players, I would say, if you like the game that you're in, great. If you don't like it, don't just abandon the hobby. Maybe try it again in a more vanilla fashion. But if you have GM'd for quite some time, my suggestion would be, you're comfortable with the hobby, you're comfortable with the system that you're working with, I would sprinkle in some gimmicks here and there. I would do them in ways that allow you to kind of do it and then forget it. And so you can see of your players, how your players react to them, how it was received, so on and so forth. The good thing about a gimmick is that most of the things that you can work with are reusable. So if you're working with reusable gimmicks, they can come back later on, and you might be able to write them in as part of your story, or be able to give the players a little bit more fun and flavor. Again, dramatic edits would be one of the, they're not really even a gimmick because they're core to so many other gameplay, but they're not core to like D&D gameplay or even World of Darkness gameplay. And those dramatic edits are very cool in terms of, being able to do a lot of fun stuff. And it's a very like small gimmicky thing that Again, I call it a gimmick, but it's not even really a gimmick. It's just more of a small little augment to the rule set that makes some things really fun. So I would sprinkle them in here and there. If you've got an idea, you're like, man, it'd be really fun to try this thing out. But it's very kind of kitschy, very, very tricked out. Like, oh man, this past present mixing, or utilizing the idea of rewinding time, or can I I'm going to have my player solve a puzzle, whatever it may be. Those gimmicks there, you could try them, do them once, do them as a side story in your main story if you're running a long chronicle. See how they react. If they like them, keep them around. If they don't, throw them out. Okay, just get rid of them. That's my first thing. If this thing doesn't work, good. We didn't have to stick with it. It only was a game session. It's not core to the story in itself. And then if they do work, like I keep saying here, or like I have said here, is if they do work, your players responded well to them, you think it makes sense, then you can kind of integrate it to become core to your world. That's the only time that I would say go forward and then integrate it as part of your core in your world, especially if you're running a long chronicle. And the good thing about gimmicks is they're much easier to explain why they started to appear, because your big bad evil guy is doing crazy stuff, and that's why you keep running into the same scenario. Or, again, just leave them out of your world. Say that was a fun thing. I'm going to put that one in my memory bank, use it again somewhere down the line. Because it's not fun to keep doing the same thing over and over again. But, depending on what your gimmick is, maybe it does enhance the core gameplay loop that you have within the story that you're telling as a whole. So anyways, that's just a little bit on my thoughts on gimmicks. Have you tried any gimmicks in your game? Have you tried to trick out different things in your game? What have you been successful with? What has been a big flop on your part? Let me know. levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. We are also on YouTube, so go ahead and smash that like button or comment there. I'll see the comment and add it to be sure to bring it up during the next show. And go ahead and review, subscribe to the podcast, recommend it to a friend, all that other good stuff. And that's going to wrap me up for the week. So have a good week, everyone. Take care.
Gaming podcast, level it up.